Thank you. So I'm Demitrius Nelon, and I work at Microsoft. I'm a principal product manager, and WinGet is the primary product that I work on. I get contacted occasionally to do presentations for user groups. I speak at a lot of different conferences. I've presented at Build and Ignite, at PSConf EU. Um, Mainly what I like to do is kind of keep things interactive and let kind of everybody ask me questions if I can. So I think I'd like to be able to do that in this kind of a forum. So, if you've got any questions, feel free to come up to the Q&A area so that I can go through. Um, you know, I, I'll start with a little bit of a history on the product. It was late 2019. At that time, I was in the Azure Marketplace organization. I was looking for something a little bit different. I wanted a customer-facing product. And at that time, the Windows Package Manager had been something that was being looked at, and there was kind of a goal of getting some kind of a preview or something out at Build in 2020. So I was very excited to join the team and begin working on the product. Definitely in the beginning, it was very bumpy. Um, we did more than just kind of cut out the, fat or trim things. It was more about getting something out. And so, it was more like no arms, no legs, just very bare bones with download an installer and then run it and do it in a secure manner. A lot of the other commands that exist today were not there. I had some pretty grand ambitions about what we would be able to deliver, but reality is often different than our plans. So from the point that we announced our first preview, we added some other things like the ability to upgrade apps and uninstall apps. And, that kind of got us to a point where we could GA. Part of the charter was really to avoid any scripts running because those are much harder to sort of make sure that they're secure and that there's not any unintended consequences. So we went out with a declarative manifest structure, and we wanted to do this all open source. So we went out to GitHub, set everything up, bootstrapped the first few packages, and kind of started going from that point, trying to figure out how we were going to do community submissions. A lot of things happened. There was a video on YouTube that basically went viral, and then all of a sudden we were getting flooded with a bunch of what I would say are suboptimal manifests. So we pulled together a moderation feature, and that's kind of the foundation that we've been working with. There were a lot of people that looked early on and said, "Hey, why are you building a funky CLI and you're not giving me JSON output?" They really wanted something that was PowerShell. And to be fully transparent, a lot of this happened many years ago. Some of these decisions were made before I joined the team. But we were thinking that we were going to need to be able to run on Nano Server. And in that kind of an environment, we didn't have the .NET platform. We didn't have PowerShell. So we had already decided to go a different direction. Very shortly after that, it became pretty obvious that we were going to need to support PowerShell. So we started working on the module. I did some work early on using Crescendo. I don't know if any of you have used that. It's a tool designed to make it easier to build PowerShell modules and kind of wrap around some kind of a CLI experience. But the reality that we found, there was just too much impedance between the PowerShell way in terms of how you name things with approved nouns and verbs, as well as how you pass arguments and the structure of the objects. So we started doing a lot of work on our COM APIs so that we could essentially abstract the CLI experience away from the GUI. And that allowed us to start doing some good work in earnest in PowerShell. I do not claim to be a PowerShell expert. I'm still learning very much myself. I'm often leaning on the PowerShell team, Steve Lee, Michael Green, several others that you might be familiar with from PowerShell conference, and trying to make sure that I'm doing things the right way, that we're providing a really good example. But honestly, I'm juggling a lot of competing priorities. We've got a bunch of enterprise scenarios we're trying to close with the private REST source that allows you to have better full supply chain control. We're trying to meet publishers where they are. I think many of you as IT professionals are very aware of the complexities and the bad behaviors that different types of installers exhibit and all of the fun things trying to figure out how to do graceful upgrades when you've got installers that don't work exactly the way you want. So a lot of this has been an evolution. I've learned a lot along the way, and I want to continue investing, as I've said in the past, to make sure that we've got a fantastic experience. With the release probably about 2 years ago, we also started looking not only at package management, but also configuration management. So we started thinking not only about how do I install something on your system, but how do I configure it? How do I make sure that we've got the right dependencies in place? How do we do things like change Windows settings or other configuration things that are going to affect how your system is performing? And really focusing on primarily eliminating developer toil. That's really been the charter. So if you want to know kind of why WinGet was built the way it was, we were really aimed at making Windows the best place for developers. And since then, because WinGet has been so successful, we've really started looking at more into what I would say are the core IT Pro type scenarios. We've done integrations with the Microsoft Store. We've done integration with Intune. We support a lot of different third-party integrations and experiences. The REST source that we have is out on GitHub, and that's open source. So, I try to be as transparent as I can. And when it comes to prioritizing work, I would say it, kind of largely comes into three big buckets of work. We have the strategic things that I would say, those are kind of the things that we're doing to integrate with other Microsoft teams and products and services. So those things might not be publicly announced depending on the other teams' goals and priorities and how they communicate. Second bucket of work, I would say, is kind of core package management or configuration management functionality. Those are things like, making sure that we can install, we can upgrade, we can uninstall. One of the really big challenges we have is something we call channels or release channels. Some applications will allow you to have a stable version of an application running side by side with a beta or a preview. Sometimes they forbid that behavior. You're only allowed to have one instance. So I could say something like Docker Desktop. You can either have stable or preview, but not both. So there's a lot of interesting challenges trying to figure out how do we define channels? How do we do that in our manifest? And how do we do that in a way that makes sense? And we have built WinGet. One of our design principles from the very beginning has been we want to pick some sort of a sane, rational default behavior, but we want to give the user the ability to override or overload that so that they can make WinGet do what they need to get done. Anybody have any questions at this point?
No questions. Right. Okay, I think Demetrius, it's a cool thing. So it would be cool if you show something.
You bet.
I think if you,
I am trying to get it to cooperate here.
Yeah, share my screen. Share the screen is near the smiley face.
There we go.
So then, there we have. Yeah.
So in theory, should be sharing my screen. You should see terminal. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Nice.
All right. So in the world of the CLI, it's WinGet and then a command or some arguments. So I'll start out with the version, and you can see that I'm on our latest 1.10 preview. I tend to stay on whatever our latest released preview is. I can certainly spin up a sandbox or a VM or do something different. People often want to know, kind of what are the details about WinGet. So if I run the info command, and I'll go ahead and make the screen font a little bit bigger for
So
you.
just Demetrius, just one thing. So to go back to the basics, so WinGet is part of the desktop app installer, correct?
Yes, and you'll see that in the output of WinGet info.
Yeah.
You'll see the desktop app installer version. So one of the decisions to deliver WinGet as a package manager was to make it part of something that was essentially already in Windows. And I think we were working on Windows 10 RS3 in some of the earliest previews. We ended up needing to bump that up to RS5, and so that's quite old. It's actually out of end of life, end of support. But unless we have a breaking thing that just cannot be serviced down level, we'll continue working on that older version. Typically on Windows Desktop, we are a store updated package. So that means the Microsoft Store service needs to be running in the background to give you updates, and we would automatically get updated. One of the frustrating things that we get feedback about is, hey, I've done a brand new, fresh Windows 11 install, and first thing I want to do is I want to jump in and I want to use WinGet to install my packages. You will often find that doesn't work. The store update mechanism essentially is going to do a pause, and it's somewhere around 15 minutes before it's kind of really going and starting to pull down and look for updates from the store, and there could be dozens of them. So there's often a delay there. We've built the Microsoft WinGet client PowerShell module so that you can pull that thing down, and there's a repair WinGet package manager commandlet that you can run. If you pass force and latest as arguments, that's basically going to make sure that you just have the latest version of WinGet on your system. That is pulling it from GitHub. It's not pulling it from the Microsoft Store. A lot of the work around the Microsoft Store and those APIs are not publicly documented. And since WinGet is open source, we're not calling any private APIs or anything that you couldn't go do yourself. So if there's anything going on in WinGet that you're interested in, you can go dig in the source code and see all of those things yourself. The app installer, go ahead.
Yeah, that was what I experienced, I think, 2 weeks ago. We had a 24H2 brand new install, would run WinGet, nothing is found. App installer was installed. I then had to download the AppX, the MSX bundle, and executed it, and then it was working. Yeah, that's
that's a common experience. Recently, we announced WinGet in Windows Server 2025. In Windows Server, the delivery mechanism is actually different. It's not coming from the store. In that case, it's essentially baked into the OS, and that will be delivered through updates. So when you basically, patch your server or apply service fixes, that will be able to include newer versions of the app installer as part of OS updates. But if you are allowed to connect to the internet with Windows Server, you'll be able to do the same kinds of things like downloading from our GitHub release or from the stable releases. As long as you have a functional version of WinGet on the server already, you can update the app installer using WinGet from the community repository. And we will use that and the WinGet manifest to pull down the dependencies that we need for UI XAML and for the VC libs.
Is it working the same if you have a 2025 server where WinGet is now included in the box? Do you have seen there some problems where WinGet is not working out of the box?
I have not.
Okay.
I will tell you that the way we communicate with the Microsoft Store, and I'm going to list out the sources here for you. The Microsoft Store provides us a REST-based endpoint, and you'll see the URL at the top there. When WinGet is communicating with that store endpoint, we don't want to be susceptible to DNS attacks or man in the middle. We actually build part of the thumbprint for that store endpoint into the client. So it could be possible in the future that you get a fresh, clean Windows Server 25, and you're looking to install something using WinGet that's coming from the Microsoft Store. That certificate could expire in some future date, or it could be revoked. And in that case, that part of the functionality would break. But if you get the latest version of the WinGet client, you'll get the latest certificate, and all of that should be working correctly. In the case of the CDN for the community repository, the WinGet source, it's a little bit different. That's actually delivering a store-signed MSIX package that contains a database of all of the versions that we have in the community repository, the hashes for them, and everything needed to make WinGet function. And that is actually a store-signed bundle. So from a security standpoint, we don't necessarily need to worry about a man in the middle there. We just make sure that we're not running code that isn't correctly signed. We take security very seriously in terms of making sure that we know what endpoints we're talking to, making sure that we're not running any applications that have been compromised. Certainly everybody in the world is vulnerable to those zero-day scenarios where there's an unknown vulnerability. But in terms of typical normal functioning behavior, we've got everything locked down, and we're even validating the hashes of the manifests that we pull down using the pointers that we get from the index that gets installed for the community source. But if you don't want the store, or you don't want the community source, you can absolutely use group policy. You can remove those sources. You can add required sources. So if you had an enterprise source, you could add that as a requirement. You could also add an allow list that basically says, hey, these are other sources that may be added. They would still require administrator access, but there may be cases where you've got kind of one WinGet source that's for the general population and everybody's got that one configured, but you might have one that's got some utilities or some other things that require sort of admin level approval so that you can go in and do those things.
Perfect. Okay. So then the experience for server is definitely better than on the normal Windows that you have to repair it always. Okay.
It is. And I'm hoping that we're going to get to the point where we're not dealing with that same kind of a challenge on desktop, but it's a fundamentally different servicing mechanism.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. So I just ran the source export command, which it's really designed for the group policy. So you're not seeing what I would say is valid JSON because you're not seeing the commas between the objects. But you'll see all of the property that we're using. One of the things to note is the trust level, where it's got trust level trusted, and we're seeing that here at the end of the command. Essentially, all of that is doing is that's basically saying, hey, if you trust this endpoint and you're downloading an installer from the internet, that tells WinGet, go ahead and change the zone of that to trusted, so that you're not getting the dialogue or the interfering prompt that says, hey, this is coming from the internet. That's really all that means. The property that you're seeing kind of in the middle, the explicit that's set to false, this is another sort of IT-driven feature request where you don't want every single command WinGet is running to go round trip your REST endpoint. So you can say explicit true, and that means in order to search that source or to install a package from that source, you have to explicitly target it by specifying the source.
Okay. Good. Just for everyone's interest, I've posted the GitHub link to the WinGet project. So just if you want to check that out. Okay, now you're using the PowerShell interface for finding a WinGet package. Okay.
So typically WinGet's going to require you passing in some kind of an argument, but the PowerShell module doesn't have that restriction on it. So I'm basically just doing a count, and I'm using find WinGet package to go search the configured sources, I will note the Microsoft Store requires you passing in at least 3 characters to get results, and they will cap out at a maximum of 20 results. So in this case, we're really only looking at how many packages are in the community repository, and you're seeing there's a little over 7,500 of those. That essentially kind of represents everything in the community repository, but there are definitely different opinions about whether or not they're unique. So you may find examples where something like Visual Studio has more than one SKU. So there's the Community Edition, the Enterprise Edition, and the Pro Edition. So some people might make an argument and say, well, that's really only one product. It's really only Visual Studio. Your number is inflated. The other case that we'll see quite frequently is when packages have different architectures. So for example, the way WinGet reasons about package in the manifest is based on the version. So each manifest is really associated with one version of a package. And there are publishers out there that don't publish the same version number for like x64 and ARM64. They might be on different version numbers. And WinGet is essentially looking to see, hey, what is the latest version I have? And it can cause some challenges where the latest version might just be for ARM. That doesn't apply for you if you're on x64 or vice versa. So you'll see in some cases packages get split out by architecture. There are also cases where packages get split out by locale. So you might see, I would say some of the browsers are pretty common for being submitted that way. You'll also see things like SDKs or runtimes get split out by their versions. Like if I'm a Python developer, I might want the latest version of 3.11, but I don't want 3.12 or something like that. So we have a lot of sort of differing opinions in the community, differing constraints on the packages themselves that leads us and the community to go out there and figure out what is the right naming convention, what is the right way to structure these packages. And that's a very, interactive, we're open to feedback, and we really look to the community to kind of help drive the behaviors they want. And it can differ based on the programming language or the runtime or the community that's using those tools.
Okay, good. So what would be the WinGet pendant to find WinGet package? I think it will just be WinGet search, I think, right?
Correct. So if I were to do WinGet search, and for this one, I'm going to put in VS Code. There is no package ID for VS Code. So this is an interesting use case where we have this concept of a moniker. And in the results, you'll see that top match. There was no package name that exactly matched VS Code. There was no ID that exactly matched it. There were several packages with tags, and there's one with a moniker. So that moniker is the top match. When I do search, I'm basically doing kind of a query across all of the metadata that's out there so that I can see what's available. Sometimes people want to know what's going to happen if I just type WinGet install and they do something like this. If you use the show command, and I'll note that I'm having to do this in the CLI because we don't have an equivalent PowerShell commandlet yet to do this. We're still working on how we're going to build that out. But what we do when you run the show command is we provide you a subset of the metadata. We're pulling in what I would say is kind of the descriptive information and the things that'll help you understand, where this package is coming from, who publishes it. When I get down to the bottom section and we start looking at the installer, WinGet is doing some logic here, and it might say in the manifest that there's an x64 and an x86 and an ARM-based installer. There might be MSI or MSIX or an executable or a compressed version of the installer. WinGet is going to run some logic and heuristics to try to figure out for this system which version of this package, which installer type, which architecture would get installed. And so depending on what I pass in, I could get kind of different results with this show command. And this is,
cool.
And this is really mostly just designed to help you figure out, is this the thing I want and where is it coming from? If I were on an ARM device, I would actually get a different result here for the installer, since it's not an MSIX, it's an XE in this case. We actually recently had a bug reported. I had been working on an ARM device for quite a while, and on those devices, I could actually show the x64 or the x86 installer, because technically those would apply to that hardware. The bug we have right now that's been fixed and checked in, and we'll get out in a release here probably in a week or so, is if I'm on an x64 device, since the ARM binaries don't apply, I couldn't show them. But where this really kind of shines is the download command. And in the PowerShell commandlet world, it's the export WinGet package command. That allows you to download the installer. This also includes the installers for packages coming from the store. If you are, kind of dealing with an offline, air-gapped, disconnected kind of a situation, and you wanted to update those store packages in that air-gapped environment, you can download those packages along with their licenses. But in order to be able to get those licenses, you do need to be an admin on intra domain, because those licenses get keyed to that domain for those store installs.
Yeah, I think the WinGet export, I think, is a very good good feature, because even if you install it via Intune, you are not getting the source to just what you're saying. For an example, if you have a disconnected system that you have to have a chance to update that package, and that's, I think, a good addition that you built there. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So since you brought up export, I'll talk a little bit about that. So in the CLI, we have an export command. And essentially what that does is it gives you a JSON file that has all of the package identifiers, and it has all of them correlated with the source that they were coming from. If you've used the WinGet CLI or the PowerShell module to install packages from the Microsoft Store, we will also correlate and include those in the export file. And then what you're going to be able to do is take this file, go to another machine, run WinGet import, and it will install all of these packages. And
okay, so this file will be created with WinGet for you, I think, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's cool.
Yes. So this is one of those conveniences where, we're really trying to figure out, how do I go from one device that's working or in some state that I like it and get it to another one? I would say this is kind of one of our first baby steps towards looking at configuration management. That is kind of one of the bigger things that we're looking at right now. We've got some work that we've done with another repository, that is the WinGet DSC repository. We've got some community contributions and some activities going on there that are giving us a lot of feedback and kind of partnership on how we think about DSC resources for configuration.
But WinGet export is different from WinGet configure, correct?
That is correct. So WinGet export, think of this as a very basic, just give me the packages that are installed and are available in sources I have configured. Note that if you go run this on another device and the other device doesn't have that source configured. So let's say we're in an enterprise scenario and I've got 4 or 5 line of business apps. If I take this to another device that does not have that enterprise source configured, WinGet will not add that source. It will not install those packages. That's done because of the security concerns. We don't want to be just dynamically adding those sources without the appropriate admin permissions.
I think another good, so it could also be packaged and, for example, deliver as a package via Intune to install a complete machine with this WinGet export. I think that that would be also a cool way to finish a machine completely to its desired state.
Yeah, I would like to see more of the work that we're doing around configuration management and doing that kind of a solution. But for now, this is something that would absolutely unlock that business value today.
Okay.
So let me pull up another lovely example of the configuration. So if I pull up the website for the .NET tutorial, the Windows instructions are very different. They used to look more like the Linux or the Mac OS that would say something like, hey, go download this thing, go download that thing. Now launch it and click into it and do some stuff. Make sure that everything is installed correctly. Bunch of manual steps. And this is a pretty trivial example, but you can certainly imagine there's more sophisticated scenarios. So what they've done is they basically said for Windows, all you're going to do is just download and run this configuration file, and you can quite literally double click it. So if I save the file, and I'll open that one up for you in VS Code. You'll see this is a very different syntax from what we have with the packages format. So this is kind of our first pass at a declarative schema for defining the desired state of a machine. So everything in here is broken down logically as a resource. You'll see the resource tells you which PowerShell module and which DSC resource it's using. We've got some other metadata that's there, but this allows you to define what you want the system to look like when it's configured, and you don't have to worry about how it gets done. This is very different from what you would typically see in like a PowerShell script, for example, where you're saying, hey, step 1, download this thing. Step 2, install this thing. Step 3, go configure this thing. Rather than having those declarative abstractions, you have to literally tell it every step of the way what to do.
Yep.
By going with this model where it's declarative, that allows us to do other types of interesting optimizations. For example, you might be downloading and installing 12 or 13 WinGet packages, and you would see this experience in the WinGet import that we talked about before, where it's going to download and then install, and then download and then install. And there's a lot of time kind of logically being wasted by sequentially waiting until something is installed to download the next thing. With a declarative format, we can basically parse the entire graph of what needs to happen. We could go download all of the installers in parallel, and then we could sequence the install based on an order of what finished downloading, assuming we don't have any dependencies in place that we have to wait before we do a particular action. So there's a lot of forward-looking work that's gone into why we went with a declarative format and kind of what this is like. And we're still working with the PowerShell team. Today, everything in here is class-based DSC v2 resources. As we look forward into the future, it will be DSC v3, where I don't necessarily have that dependency that I have to pull down a PowerShell module to affect the configuration, but we are going to support a blended mode. So for example, as we build out our Windows settings resources, there is no executable in Windows that we could go talk to handle all of that in a v3 way, but we still want to give you that flexibility. But for example, we will make WinGet a DSC v3 resource so that you can literally talk to WinGet directly to have it tell you what's installed or to make settings and changes. And a lot of that will happen, looking at our settings file. Let me pull up this. I pull up my settings, you'll see it's a JSON file. I've got some experimental features enabled. That first one, configure self-elevate, is really around configuration files. We run into cases where, hey, I want to go set a device up. I've got 8 or 10 things I need to install. Maybe 1 or 2 of those require admin. I don't want to sit there and have to babysit this configuration run. So by adding the configure self-elevate, what we do is we go look at that configuration file. If something says that it requires elevation, as soon as you begin executing the configuration, we'll give you the UAC prompt. If you say yes and you approve it, then what we'll do is we'll spin up 2 kind of sets of child processes. One of these is an elevated process that only executes those things that require elevation. The other one is run in kind of user context, and it won't elevate anything that's not supposed to be elevated. You'll also note I've got fonts in there. One of our top asked features from the community was adding support for fonts, so we're working that in. And then on the visual, you'll see we've got an implementation of Sixels for rendering icons in the terminal. And I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like using terminal preview.
So just a question on the settings JSON file, Demetrius. Could this be rolled out globally? Because I think the settings that you are shown are not configured standard, I think.
Yeah, these are not standard settings. There are some of the settings that you can roll out that can be controlled by policy.
Okay.
But a lot of the experimental features will change over time. Logically, you could kind of push a file out, but it's not something that's been made super convenient. So if you think there are settings that would make sense to push out globally, or if you think it makes sense to define a configuration, for the WinGet settings and push that out as a file, we can. But I think a lot of the work that we're doing around DSC v3 means you'll have an API that you can use, and you can actually do this with the V2 resource. I can even use the configure export experimental feature to pull out my current WinGet settings that would then be applied on, the next time I ran it as a configuration.
Okay, so at the moment it's dependent on what is configured in, or what can you roll out as a group policy. And I think the experimental features are not part of group policy, correct?
So there is a group policy around blocking experimental features because some enterprises may not want that. But we don't have any notion of policies that, control individual experimental features like that. Doing something that fine-grained, I feel like that would slow us down quite a bit because we would need to roll out the policy, make sure that that works, and then roll out updates to the client.
Are these policies or are these settings are always also configurable with Intune, or do you need GPO for this at the moment?
You would need GPO.
Okay. So I have to import the GPO into Intune and set it there. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. So I launched Windows Terminal Preview with the Sixel progress bar and Sixel enabled. Excuse me. And so you can see I did a WinGet show on VS Code. Then I've got the Visual Studio Code icon.
Okay, nice. Is there another use case why you are enabling Sixel support, or is it just for displaying an icon? Or do you see any future investment with this feature?
So we've got several different integrations that people have done with WinGet. You've got UniGet UI as something that's open source and has been very well received, and that's by Marty Clement. We've got some other integrations that we've done where people want to be able to see the icon for the application. It is a more recognizable sort of piece of branded information or something like that. I'll note I did the same thing for the app installer, and you'll note there's no icon that shows up for this one. It really depends on what's happening when we go through and we do the validation for the community packages, which is a kind of a whole nother topic to get into. But basically, when we go through our validation process and we test out installing the application in a hardened environment with antivirus actively running and a file watcher running, if the application installs a single icon and that is what's actually in the settings for apps and features, we will extract that, put that metadata out there. It's just a nice visual indicator of what you've got. The other thing that we've gotten a lot of feedback on is progress bars with the configuration. Right now, if I were to run a configuration, it ends up, showing you kind of very little progress related information. And we're getting a lot of requests to be a little bit more detailed. So we're doing some more work around that, trying to figure out, are there better ways we can be more informative? What can we do to let you know kind of how many steps are in this configuration and what % they are complete? I know there's a lot of great examples of kind of Microsoft progress bars because you're guessing. You don't yet know how big the thing is you're downloading. You don't know what other kind of I/O constraints you've got, whether it's disk or memory. So we often see progress bars that start and stutter and jitter, or seem to get stuck for a long time and then jump to complete. Those are some pretty intractable problems, but we make our best attempt to use the information we have to provide the best approximation we can. But there's a lot going on there, and we know a lot of people are building things on top of WinGet as a platform. And we know that it's not all purely just CLI or PowerShell script based. So we're trying to make sure that we're kind of exposing the metadata that other applications might want to be able to take advantage of.
Okay, so for displaying the image, you don't have to change the manifest file to provide an image URL or so. So you handle the image out of the .exe file or the MSI file. If it's a valid image file, you will extract it and show it. Am I understanding it correctly? Okay.
Yes, that's what we do for the community repository.
Okay.
By policy, we want to be very careful because it's not always the publisher submitting the package. It could be simply somebody from the community that wants this, and it meets our criteria for suitability and all of the other compliance concerns that we have. So we try to be very careful about not making it easy for someone to go in and put in either incorrect or misleading information, or you don't want to point to somebody's asset on the internet and then have something wild happen, and now you're causing a bunch of traffic or bandwidth problems for them. We're trying to be very sort of responsible and graceful with everybody's resources on the internet. We also have cases where some installers are coming from websites that are essentially monetizing by having people see the ads before they can download something. We may not be able to include those packages in the community repository. But if you're an enterprise and you're standing up your own private source, you can absolutely put whatever icons or images or metadata that you want in there. From an enterprise standpoint, we give you full control over everything. From a community repository, that essentially every default user on Windows is going to be able to see and experience, we constrain a lot of things so that we don't have any sort of problems with people submitting incorrect information or something like that. And certainly, we take the security posture very seriously. So when somebody submits a manifest to the community repository, they have to sign our common CLA for making open source contributions. The manifest has to be a well-formed YAML document that matches our schema. It needs to be only one manifest per pull request. We will then sort of validate that the syntax is correct, we then start going into a bunch of automated checks. We'll start out with making sure that all of the URLs lead to websites that have good enough reputation to not get blocked by Smart Screen. If that all passes, we start looking at all of the domains, all of the URLs. We're looking to see that they are essentially matching each other. We don't want to see something like this application is published and it's contoso.com, but the download URL is coming from fabricam.com. That looks disingenuous. So we would flag something like that. We would then want to go make sure that the official publisher's site actually references that other domain that the application is coming from, so that we can make sure that it's, an authentic download from that particular site or for that particular package. Assuming all of that is good and we don't have any other sort of violations of policies with words that we don't want to see in there in terms of potentially abusive language or things that might infringe on copyrights or trademarks, all of those kinds of things, then we get into the analysis side of things. So we will then pass the URL and the SHA-256 hash over to another team that does static analysis. They'll go look at that binary, make sure there's not any known malware or detections or potentially abused or compromised SSL certificates. If all of that stuff is kind of good, then we move on to a detonation phase where we spin up a hardened VM. We bootstrap ourselves and some other tooling. We will then download, verify the hash again, run the installer with everything actively scanning, trying to make sure that there's not any malware or PUA involved in that particular process. We want to make sure that the thing installs correctly, that we get a 0 return code. In some cases, for portable applications, if you just run them without passing any arguments, you won't get a 0. We have some processes for handling those kinds of failures. We get, assume we get to the point where everything installed, nothing nefarious was found or suspected. Then what we want to do is actually launch the application for what I would say is kind of a first run type of an experience, where we want to make sure that, running the application the first time doesn't just immediately go fetch some malware or bundleware or PUA. Assuming all of those things are looking good from an automated perspective, then that manifest goes back to the community repository. It's passed all of the automated scans. At this point, we're looking for either someone from Microsoft or one of our trusted community moderators to kind of go do a sanity check. Things like, does the description look good? Does this look like it's, some original work and not just somebody's private fork of an application or something like that? And if they put their approval on it, then it will get merged into the GitHub repository. Once that happens, we move on to a publishing phase. And in our publishing phase, we are basically taking all of the changes from all the pull requests that have been merged. We're building up that index database that we distribute, going through all the processes for that thing to get signed, published to the CDN endpoint. Once it gets published, we'll go back to that pull request and let the author know that the update's been published and that it should be available the next time they refresh their cache. And that default TTL is 15, 16 minutes to be able to have WinGet go ahead and download it, but you can force that using a source update.
Okay, so in a short, if you provide a pull request with a manifest, you will do checks with a VM in the background. If everything is correctly there, then you do some manual checking, and then it will get merged into the community repository. Okay, so you will do that for every pull request, do the installation, check it, and so on. That's so if it's automated, it's cool. So it's like is it like the sandbox demo that you showed? I think in the last conf usage.
So it's not running a sandbox. It is running in a full dedicated hardened Windows VM image.
Yeah.
And that's one of our requirements. If we're running some kind of an unknown binary, we don't want that binary being able to compromise anything else on the network.
Yeah, but that's the same principle. So you spin up a machine, install this thing, and then throw the machine away. So that's, in my opinion, the same thing as doing a sandbox. Because if you quit the sandbox, then it's
Everything's
also
gone.
cleaned. Yeah.
Yep. And I'm just showing you here in the last, I want to say, probably 5 years, give or take. 200, nearly 210,000 pull requests have come in and been reviewed. The vast majority of these are package manifests. Some of these could be other things that we're doing with code, could be, some of the sample tooling that the community's built to help with validation or some documentation or other things. But the vast majority of these are package submissions. And you can see, if I dig into one of these, for example, this one was submitted. We kicked off our pipelines. You can actually go in and kind of dig into the details of these pipelines. And you can look inside installer validation. And this particular one came back, and its result was it failed. That means that there was some sort of a detection that was found for this particular package. In some cases, these are valid. Somebody submitted something, there is a piece of malware or some other bit of PUA that's in there, and we block it. In some cases, it's a false positive. We've seen this. I think we've seen this with Docker. We've seen this with some other, what I would say are sort of low-level debugging or troubleshooting tools. And in those cases, we don't let them in. They have to be able to get through all of our scans. It can be frustrating, but better safe than sorry. And we do provide the links in the pull request so that if somebody believes it to be a false positive, they can go submit that to Microsoft Security and have someone go perform the review on that. And if it is a false detection, they'll update the signatures. And then once that kind of gets through all of the systems, then that pull request could be resubmitted. And assuming it was a false detection, it would pass and everything would be able to continue functioning as we expect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Just 1 second. If we go back to WinGet configure just for a moment, I think we have to add something there just for verification. You could write these files yourself if you want, but I think there is a tool which is called DevHome, which is I think a better. So it's a clicky solution where you can get in the end out these files. So for example, if you want to, I think we have to explain what DevHome is. What is the idea behind DevHome?
Sure. So DevHome is it's a GUI based experience, and it's really been designed to support some developer workflows. It's an application that's in preview. There's a bunch of different experiences that are part of DevHome. It's got a graphical experience around package management. It has a graphical experience around configuration management. There's kind of a machine configuration and setup. There's a section for environments. I'm not sure if this is going to run. I've got some other kind of early bits of code on mine. There you go. So you can see Windows Sandbox environment. I've also got Hyper-V on here. That's the one I'm not sure if I've got all the right versions of the modules to show for that.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
So you can see this is a VM that I had from the demo that I performed at Ignite for private WinGet REST sources using Entra ID authentication. If I go into machine configuration, I've got the, hey, I want to set up my local machine step by step. Same thing for setting up an environment. And then I've got one for doing a configuration file. And if I pick the .NET configuration, you'll see sort of a different view rather than looking at the raw YAML. It's a little bit more of a visual, but if you wanted to look at the raw file, you can look at the raw file. And there's an experience that you can go through kind of like a shopping cart where you pick apps and packages that you want to install, and that will generate a configuration file that looks a lot like this one. But what I will say is the way DevHome is doing it is a little bit different than what I think we want to be able to build into WinGet natively.
Okay.
I want WinGet natively to be a little bit smarter about understanding dependencies and being able to do application settings and some of those other things as well. So you'll see sort of different use cases for a CLI versus a GUI in terms of what the experience and the flow looks like. But under the hood, essentially everything is still depending on WinGet, and it's integrating through our COM APIs. Even our PowerShell module is calling our COM APIs, and that's really aimed in an attempt to give kind of full feature parity for any type of an experience that somebody wants to build.
I just wanted to point out DevHome because it's I think it's not intuitive to write these YAML files yourself or these WinGet files yourself. And if you want to have a good starting point, especially if you're a developer or you have to change to a new SQ or you want to have, I think there's a repository out in Microsoft GitHub that has some sample files. I think if you want to have terminal development environment or a Go environment or so, there are the files already prepared. So if you are a developer or if you want to change between projects and languages, you have different environments or virtual machines, you can use these templates as a starting point and elaborate there to get up to speed very fast if you want to develop something. That was the thing that I want to point out. And if you want to add to the YAML, then you can do it easily, but you have a good starting point and not have to start from scratch. That was the thing that I want to point out.
You bet. Yeah. So we've made an AKA link. It's aka.ms/dsc.yaml that takes you into the WinGet DSC repository. We've got a samples directory. So we've got a couple of templates that we've been looking at for like different types of development. We've got a few from some different repositories that we built, and so this would be, github.com/ and then organization and project. These are not necessarily kept up to date. A lot of these, I would say, were kind of done for proof of concept or just to get some samples out there. And then for many of the DSC resources that we've been building, we've got sample configurations that use those as well. So for the Windows Sandbox, one of the caveats that we have with configuration, and this is true for WinGet because it's packaged. It's also true for PowerShell if you run the MSIX packaged version of PowerShell. There's an issue when you're calling the DISM APIs to do machine configuration. So we expect that essentially to be working to run the sandbox configuration. This is going to make sure that the sandbox gets spun up and WinGet gets bootstrapped in it. We also have an AKAMS link for this one that you can run WinGet configure and pass a URL into. And that will do it. But for the sake of completeness and to kind of keep us honest about the bug that we ran into, I should be able to run a configuration that will not only spin up the sandbox and do what I want, but it should be able to verify that I have the right Windows features enabled to fully make that go. So this is one of those areas where we have a gap right now. I know there's been some work in progress that I've seen where this has been addressed. I just don't know if this is going to go down level to earlier versions of Windows. And I always try to be as transparent and open and honest as I can about product truth, kind of while balancing what people need to be able to get their job done but it's still, my goal to get to a point where we have the ability to run any kind of a configuration on the system. We don't have a lot of the, technical challenges that we have today. I want everything to be buttery smooth. And certainly we're looking at experiences for building configuration files. And if anybody's interested, feel free to send me an email. We've got some other people on the product team looking at this problem around building configurations, and we believe it's hard ourselves to build them. So we're looking at how we can build better tooling around that. And other questions around, would you want this to be a CLI based experience, or would you want it to be some kind of a dedicated application, or maybe a plugin for an IDE or something else? We don't claim to have kind of the monopoly on all of the best ideas. I would rather build the best idea than have any pride about thinking my idea is the best one and building that. And that's really, to me, part of being open source and really fostering community. There was a lot of challenge and friction around the PowerShell modules, and I went through and took the time to learn how to kind of have hand-to-hand combat with Platypus and Mammal and build the help files for the PowerShell modules, and learned quite a bit there. So definitely there are people in the community that know lots more than I do about different bits and pieces of this, and I'm always open to get that feedback and take those suggestions.
So just another questions there. Question: there are so many DSC resources out there. So take it easier, the file resource, and this more complex is, for example, SQL Server DSC or so. Am I able to use this also inside of WinGet configuration?
So any DSC resource, and I'm just going to see if I can get something to show up.
Yeah. Yeah.
As soon as I filter it, they'll go away. Let me do.
Yeah.
There we go. So not all DSC resources are going to work. If it is a class-based PowerShell module, then I expect if it works with invoke DSC resource, it works with WinGet. We've got plenty of examples of binary resources that do not work. So like file resource that you mentioned, and some others don't. We are absolutely working with the PowerShell team on how do we think going forward this is going to work? How do we make it easier for people to be successful with these? And that's why we opened up the WinGet DSC repository, was to have a place where we can go kind of work together and build some of those gaps and unblock some of the scenarios that people have. There's also concerns about, hey, this DSC resource is really old and it wasn't made by Microsoft. Do I trust it? We can't make any assurances there. Definitely recommend going and looking at them. I know the PowerShell team has been working on integrating with Azure Container Registry so that you can have supply chain control of those resources, and WinGet will know how to make sure that it's not just pulling down some random module from the public PowerShell gallery. But there are still definitely some gaps and some areas that we need to invest in to make it easier to find and use them, as well as being able to test them to see, are they actually fit for purpose? You might have a resource that is only partially complete, that met someone's needs when they built it, but it may not meet your needs. And those are definitely some of the challenges that we've been working through.
Because there could be some interesting use cases, for example. So if you are inside a on-premises data center and you don't have access to the guest configuration stuff, there could definitely be a use case for doing WinGet configure MySQL Server or so, to use SQL Server DSC, for example, to install a full-fledged SQL Server. But I think SQL Server DSC will not work because this, I think, is a normal, so it's not a class-based resource, I think. So this will not work. So there could definitely be a use for this, because at the moment you have to use DSC v1 to do something like this. I think would be definitely a good investment to make that work. Or if we are going the DSC v3 route, then it's totally a different conversation, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my goal is to give people options, pick some, understandable default behaviors. But when it comes to configuration management, it's definitely, an exercise in what I would say is kind of boiling the ocean, if you will, where, it looks like an impossible Herculean task. But from my point of view, if we don't kind of have a North Star direction or, something that we're aiming for, we're certainly not going to get there. So I think there's a lot of activity right now around what does desired state configuration look like? How do we make it more approachable, more reliable? I think people really, understand the pain and the frustration of getting a complex environment set up. Your documentation quickly becomes out of date. Versions of software get released. You might not have either correctly or completely followed the instructions. I'm guilty of this myself. I was fiddling with Unity development and trying to see if I could use WinGet to set up a Unity development environment, and went down the wrong path, even though I was going through a tutorial. So, lots of challenges out there with getting things set up and set up correctly. And that's really where I think we all want to be, and be able to have it in source control. That way you can check something in. You've got a versioned artifact that you can then go test and validate. And once you've done that, you can roll it out, and you can have confidence that the environment is going to be exactly what you expected.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think the AKMS link, Alan, I think it was the correct one. I think you were asking for the WinGet DSC GitHub repo, correct? You want to just unmute yourself? Okay, yeah, perfect. Okay, I provided it in the chat, so just for you to get, yeah. Okay, perfect. So does anyone have any questions? Just go to the Q&A area and ask a question. Anyone? Okay, no one is going the Q&A route, or Alan, I think. Alan, you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Is there any way with the current WinGet to, like, say, for example, install the Git package with the configuration file? So, oh God, fire alarm.
Oh my God. Hope you are safe.
Yeah, somebody's cooking and making a mess.
Okay. Okay. So your question was, is there a way to get a Git package down with WinGet? Correct?
Not the package itself, but while you're installing it, to supply a configuration file at the same time.
So the WinGet DSC resource would install a package. But if you had a package that needed a configuration file, I don't think we have all of that wired up yet. We still don't have full parity in the WinGet DSC resource to be able to do things like pass in an explicit architecture choice, or overrides to the arguments, or additional arguments or parameters that you wanted to pass to the installer. But definitely, if that's something that is critical, be sure to put a thumbs up on the issue at the CLI repository, or if it's not already there, make one, and we'll figure out if it's a duplicate or not. There's still, it's one of those things where the surface area of package management and configuration management is really massive, and Unfortunately, in some cases, I don't have enough resources or the luxury to go completely finish something. A lot of times we're still in the, let's get 80% of it working. Let's get feedback from people on what works, and make that address the largest population that we can. And then as we get into the fringes of, interesting installers or other interesting scenarios around configuration management, that's really where kind of the hard bits and the longer lead time things are. That's also part of the benefit of us being open source. If something is really blocking you and you've got the passion and the knowledge to go tackle that, we will gladly kind of work with you to write a spec if it needs one, help foster that PR, review it, and get it in. But there are definitely some challenges out there, and I've run into them myself. And I've done things like, write up what I would say is kind of the simplest example of what I want to have happen, and then go back and work with the engineering team to figure out what a design would look like or figure out when we can sequence it. And I do tend to be very transparent about what we're working on. At GitHub, all of our repositories have a projects link, and this project will give you an idea of what we are currently working on that's prioritized across all of the repositories. This to-do bucket, this is kind of me pulling some work items in, saying, okay, this is probably really important stuff that we need to be working on next, other than critical bugs or outages. You can see if we've got things assigned to people, whether they're Microsoft employees or community members. You can see occasionally we're going to put something on hold. And that's typically either for, technical complexity or, security or privacy review or something like that. Or it's just too big for us to finish given some of the other stuff that we've got going on right now. You can see the things that are actively in progress. Once it's marked done, that really doesn't mean it's shipped. That just means code complete, unit tests. The next time we cut a build, we expect it will be there. I don't really worry about putting those into like the preview category or whatever. Released is just hey, this is what is out in the latest stable version of WinGet, and that also will include any of those experimental features. And I get a lot of feedback from people that will say, oh, this has been a bug for 2 years and you've known about it. Why haven't you fixed it? Well, unfortunately, whatever that bug was hasn't been the highest priority. And I absolutely understand the reality of, if there's a bug that's blocking you from doing something, you do not care at all about my other features. I totally get that, and, take full responsibility on that. I have to balance a lot of competing priorities for kind of making progress and making things better within the Microsoft ecosystem, along with the other core package management and configuration management capabilities and the things that the community is most interested in. I do make a point to try and make sure we get something that is one of the top asks from the community that's out there. And the way I do that is by sorting the issues by thumbs up. And that gives me a really good implementation about what people care about. So if you look at the top, it's the installing a package doesn't add it to the path. That's not necessarily a WinGet thing. It's actually a very long-standing historical Windows thing. Interestingly, on a latest stable version of Windows, if you're using command.exe as opposed to PowerShell, WinGet is registered as a package manager. And if the application installer adds a new path entry, either prepending to the front or appending at the end for user or system, you can immediately run the application. Mm-hmm. I've reached out to people on the PowerShell team. It's a little bit different to implement this and make this work in PowerShell. They're definitely looking at it and trying to figure out the right approach there. That's why this issue is still open, even though we're treating it's external. It's not really part of WinGet. It's part of the operating system, but it's a very big deal. Then you get the next one right now, which is recently overtaken fonts, which is displaying the path to an installed package. We will very likely go tackle that one next once we get fonts done. And then you'll see the next one after that is enhancements to the list command. And that's something that I had created in 2021. So, you can definitely see there's a lot of work out here that we've known about that's been there for a long time. But if you go look at the pull request activity and look at what we're doing, there is always constant activity here, either addressing security concerns, trying to fix bugs, address usability, or something like that. Wish I had infinite resources and could just, go assign all 1,100 issues to 1,100 people and get it all done. But unfortunately, that's not reality.
Definitely.
We all face that problem.
Yep.
Yes.
And the reality as well is people shouldn't be asked to go over those kinds of things, because they need to think, well, hang on, if it was the other way around and you were asking them to do something, would they stick it right at the top of their list? And the answer is probably no.
Yeah, it's easy when you're yelling into the void of the internet and you're complaining about a company to forget that there might be a human being on the other end that actually does care.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same for everybody. So they should really think about how would you deal with it yourself first before you go poking at people and being just obnoxious or impolite or whatever.
Yeah. So, any other questions or concerns? I think we've bounced through the majority of topics that have been brought up. I can't really think of anything else to kind of dig into unless there's specific questions or concerns or something like that.
Any other questions from anyone else? Just go to the Q&A section and unmute yourself.
Or that magic stop your mouse getting greasy when somebody's just very kindly dropped you some food. So I don't think we can solve that one now.
Okay, I think Alan, you have to go out to the of the Q&A section, I think. I think I have another question. So you mentioned that there is a private resource, or there's a private repository. Is this the WinGet CLI REST source repository that you mentioned earlier?
Yes. So we built this as a reference implementation for building your own source.
Yeah.
We've made it where you can deploy this to Azure. We've recently published a new release along with a new module that will help kind of bootstrap and publish one of these sources. And, if you wanted to do your own implementation that didn't run on Azure and did whatever you wanted it to, we've got the Open API spec here that defines the full API so that you can kind of crack it open and do your own implementation if you wanted to. This is an area that's been, I would say kind of hot and cold in terms of attention. There's a flurry of activity early on when we integrated with Intune. We thought maybe Intune would want to expose these APIs and offer being a source of packages and not have to go through the existing mechanisms. But I think the scope of that work evolved and changed. So we kind of went a little bit dormant on it. I know that there are some commercial options available, and there are some open source options available. So I believe WinGet.pro, Nerd.io, Intune Packager. I think there's a handful of others that are out there, definitely not trying to, endorse one or over another or not endorse anything. I think, from what I've seen, they're all fantastic. It's just a matter of I'm not familiar with all of them, but, very happy to work with the community. We actually had an issue that was submitted based on some breaking changes between the last version and this one. And it was really primarily related to new security constraints we have with the Secure Future initiative. So we're looking at what we're going to do there, whether or not that means kind of two flavors, one that is less secure and one that is more secure, or if it's going to be, that we'll try to find a way to help build some kind of an automated solution to be able to migrate and get to the one that is, currently out there that is more secure. We're also building support for the authentication in the WinGet download scenario so that you can actually have, sort of full end-to-end Entra ID control over both the source, the manifests, and the installers. We're also looking at being able to put the installers in an Azure Container Registry so that as we move forward with the desired state configuration story, we can make it a little bit easier by saying, hey, you can put all of your artifacts here in this one place. And that way you've got, one location to go look to make sure for everything that's approved or not, and then have enough control around group policy and the other configuration aspects to be able to make sure that it's exactly what you want. Some other things that we've been considering are things like adding a signature to a configuration file so that you could have a policy that says only execute signed configuration files. And then you could, in addition to that, have the policies that make sure all the resources and installers come from your Azure Container Registry, and continue kind of building those layers of defense in depth around what's happening. Some of these things are motivated either by just our own understanding of security and our own concerns. Some of them are customers that are asking for these kinds of things specifically. So again, make sure that if this is something that you want, or if there's a feature that you're interested in, go put your thumbs up on it. That gives me a signal that that's important, that I need to look at prioritizing that. And if there's no issue that's created out there at any of the WinGet repositories, that doesn't mean I don't know it yet. It usually just means either I was lazy and didn't go type it in real quick, or I haven't thought fully enough about the right way to ask for that feature or the right place to stick it.
Okay, so would you say that the REST source is production ready, or is it just this is a base implementation, and we have to provide it ourselves, or?
So I'm gonna answer that one by saying it depends.
Okay. Okay.
One of the gaps I just called out is we don't have the Entra ID for authenticating for downloading an installer.
Yeah.
If that's a requirement for you, then it's clearly not production ready.
Yeah.
But if all you need is, I need to make sure that my users don't get packages from an unauthorized source using WinGet, then I would say it is absolutely production ready for that, because you can stand one up on Azure. You, given the appropriate roles through the portal, you can lock down who can add, remove, and modify packages. And you can already set up policy on WinGet that says, hey, WinGet, don't use the store, don't use the community repository, only use my private source. But that's going to come with the implications that network isolation is the only security mechanism you're going to have for your installers. So it just really depends on what your needs are. And we're doing a lot of the legwork right now to kind of close some of the gaps on secure supply chain, as well as hardening the deployment and the mechanisms for being able to go in and manipulate the source.
So then it would be better to wait on this to get the next release in, where this is a bit better designed, correct? Or
so I don't know the design is going to change that much. I would say it's just features and functionality. It really depends on what your needs are. If it's just small, medium business, there's maybe 40 or 50 apps that people can have, but I don't want them getting any others, I think it's great for that. If it's you've got some proprietary software or line of business applications that you don't want leaving your enterprise, I don't think I would go and use this for something like that at this point. Like I said, it really depends on your use case. And we're happy to have people go do community discussions and, talk about whatever is out there or missing. And again, this is also open source. So if there's an idea that you've got and you want to, work on an implementation, feel free to file an issue. Let me know. I'm happy to work with the community in whatever capacity we can to foster making those kinds of improvements. We do have an HTTP header property that the client can pass to a REST source. So you could use that to experiment or implement any other kind of functionality or behavior that you wanted. But that also requires that you are either not allowing your users to directly call WinGet and you're doing it either through Intune or some other mechanism. But there is a lot of affordance there for custom behaviors and being able to kind of take control and build whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking for a turnkey, zero development kind of a solution, I'd say we're probably not at that point yet.
Okay. Is there some kind of a demo video where someone sets it up just for demo purposes to check out the functionality at the moment?
There's not a demo video yet. I'm actually planning with someone in the community to build one.
Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's definitely been one of the things I wanted to be able to do, is start having, the kind of the combination of source code, documentation, and short videos.
Mm-hmm.
I've done several short videos myself. I've done some with community members. Mohammed Danish and Caleb Lidkey have done some videos with me. A lot of other ones. I really like showcasing the community, because that tends to be kind of more realistic of a real world scenario rather than me kind of guessing at what people want to do or how things work.
Where can we find them? Are they on the Windows Developer YouTube channel, or are there
I've done some videos that are Learn at Microsoft Learn. I think it's open at Microsoft.
Okay. 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 And then okay. Okay. Cool. I was not aware of this. I think we should paste it in the chat, I think. Okay, cool. And then another question. So when you mentioned the Intune functionality in WinGet, I think you mean the Store App New experience, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I tried to uninstall some apps through the Store App New experience. So the built-in Windows apps that are not needed for a customer. And I stumbled upon the issue that, for example, Solitaire Collection was not available through Store App New. I also found I also used the trick of getting the ID of the package, and it was also not found. And then I think I checked the Reddit article where I think it was Richard Sidaway told me or wrote down that this is a story that we don't want to talk about it, and we should say, okay, that's not available. Can you talk a bit about this, or why is it the reason that we don't find some packages through the Store App New experience?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different policies around the Microsoft Store and all the agreements that are essentially between the user installing the application from the store and the publisher that's publishing it. The current WinGet integration with the store is predominantly restricted to apps that are rated E for everyone. They're free, as opposed to free trial or paid.
Okay.
And there are some restrictions around games. I don't know what all of those restrictions are, but typically that endpoint that WinGet is talking to, that is the REST API, that is not the 100% full catalog of everything in the store. Things that are paid that you're not able, are things you're not going to be able to install. We've been looking at how WinGet can take the MSA credentials for the user that's logged into the store and pass those through for apps that have an entitlement. We added metadata. There's a field, I believe it's called purchase URL, that would allow you to essentially add a link to whatever kind of a storefront you had. I think we would be able to do something like that and possibly wire that up so that you could purchase an app and then have it installed that way. the age restrictions, there's a lot of security and concerns around parents that say, for example, I don't want my child to install anything, that's not rated E for everyone or whatever the different IARC ratings are. So there's a lot of work that has to go there. And rather than have the risk of something getting installed that shouldn't be and either violating a license or doing something, age inappropriate, a lot of those restrictions were put into place. Over the fullness of time, I would love to see all of those things, all of those scenarios be functional. I would also love to see scenarios where, for example, an enterprise could choose to purchase an application that is made available through the Microsoft Store and then deploy that out to the enterprise. But today that mechanism doesn't exist. You can't today log into the Microsoft Store as an enterprise customer. I don't know what the roadmap looks like there, but those are definitely things I've heard feedback from, and they make sense to me.
Yeah, so my solution was then to provide a proactive remediation to, say, remove AppX package ID of the solitaire collection, and then that's for me it is very it is not a complete solution. I think you understand this, but if it's like this, then okay, we have to live with this. Then that's what life is. Okay. So does anyone have any other questions? So we still have 15 minutes. If we don't have any questions, I think I don't want to steal so much time from Dimitrius' workday, because I think he has much other topics to do, I think.
No worries. It's always a pleasure to reach out and talk to customers and get real feedback and share what's going on. I know, Microsoft is a really large company. A lot of people don't know, when do I go to Microsoft Learn? When do I go to GitHub? When do I go to, pick your favorite, blog site or whatever. So, I'm very big on kind of community outreach and working directly with people and trying to figure out, are we building the right things? Are we providing some value? And, and where do we need to go next? The PowerShell story for WinGet has been a very long time coming. We have made a lot of progress. I still feel like we have a long way to go. And you'll see on the backlog, on that kind of to-do list at the WinGet project, you'll see me pull things in every once in a while that may not make sense. And in many cases, that is just, hey, we can't not make any progress in some aspect of the product. We have to always make a little bit of progress in a bunch of different areas in order to show everybody, we do care about those scenarios and we do understand the business value.
Sebastian says, I'll be keeping fingers crossed that you catch up with Chocolatey.
I don't really look at, Chocolatey or Scoop or Nanite or Impacty or any of the other package managers out there as a competing kind of a thing. For me, it's purely just, how do I help eliminate the toil of installing and configuring stuff on Windows? That's one of the top pain points that we hear over and over again. And if there's another solution that works for you and meets the needs of your business, absolutely go do that. I would love for it to be WinGet all the things, but that's just because I'm highly biased. I get to work on such an exciting product at the scale I get to work at. So for me, it's just been an absolute joy.
Yeah, Sebastian says, I like native solutions. So I definitely agree. One other question. So you I think what you don't mention is WinGet will get his information where to install or where the source is from the manifest, so from the YAML file. So if I provide a valid YAML file with the right information to WinGet that is not in the repository that I have lying on my hard drive, does WinGet install will go with this, or
Yes.
will it show an error?
Yes, it's an administrative setting to enable local manifest files.
Okay.
Once you've enabled that setting as an administrator, then you can tell WinGet to install a package using a local file.
Okay.
And there are arguments that you can pass that
Okay.
also tell it where it should get its dependencies from if there are other dependency packages.
Ah, okay. But that is that a setting that you can provide with via group policy, or is it a manual thing? Okay, that's a group policy thing. Okay, nice.
To WinGet features, this is typically showing you the features that are controlled by the settings that WinGet has in the user settings file.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have any policy set up on here. I don't.
Okay.
If I had any of the group policies, you would see policy settings, but this collection of settings at the bottom, that is the admin settings, those are things that require admin, and those are things that are all controlled by policy as well.
Okay.
So I could go in and I could enable local manifest files. This bypass certificate pinning. We've had a couple of enterprise customers that are using stateful SSL/TLS inspection between endpoints and devices. If you do that, then the certificate is different because it now comes from the firewall, not from the store. So some customers need to be able to disable that. The hash override is basically, I don't care about security of the thing. I just want it to install this URL. The local archive malware scan override, when you're doing a local manifest and it's a compressed package, we do some detection looking for zip bombs and some other compromises, and that can be a performance thing. The proxy command line options allows you to do proxy stuff through the command line. And then default proxy is basically saying, hey, I just want all my WinGet all my WinGet network traffic to go through an HTTP proxy, for example, as opposed to sort of the one that's built into Windows.
Nice. Okay. Because that can also be a solution for installing a package through a Intune package, for example. Oh, nice.
Yep.
Okay.
Let me see if I can do policy here.
I think you have to have the. Here is it. Okay. Okay.
I'm just gonna enable this one. I think that should be sufficient for WinGet info.
And here we have the enable app installer local manifest files. There is the policy for this. Nice.
Yeah. There we go. So now that I've got a group policy, you'll actually
now we have a
see-
different setting. Okay.
Right.
Okay, cool.
And this was essentially done primarily as a debugging tool for us. Users routinely will have policies affecting things, and they're going to come submit a bug, and they're going to go, "Oh, this thing doesn't work. I tried to do X, it didn't work." If they give us the output of WinGet info, that's pretty obvious if there's a group policy there that's kind of messing with things. So I do this one, and I can say disabled. I don't want them to use local manifest files.
So Frank is saying, great work, Demetrius. Awesome session. I've learned a lot. Can definitely agree. So enable. Okay, now we have a second thing. Local manifest files disabled. Okay, cool.
And if a user goes in and has admin and they enable one of these things, but they don't actually go change the policy setting, WinGet will still honor the policy setting.
Okay,
but
cool.
as we all know, if you've got admin on your box, you completely can make it do anything you want it to do. So in many cases, I think our policies are, I don't know the best word for it, but basically, because I've gone in with policy and I've said I can't turn one of these admin settings on, if the user has admin, they're going to be able to turn those settings on. They're going to be able to go in and modify the policy stuff. So all of that should always be taken with a grain of salt. I think, IT community is pretty familiar with that, but we still attempt to make a best effort, and that still helps us when we're trying to do troubleshooting and dealing with some of those other scenarios.
Okay. But see, the WinGet directory is the logs directory. What kind of logs can we expect inside of this logs folder? Is there the complete experience, say, download a package, installing the package, error code XYZ happening, and so on? Or
so we have a couple of arguments. We've got logs and verbose logs that you can pass as arguments. I just passed logs. Since I didn't give it anything else to do, it actually was a non-zero return code. But you'll see every command, every configuration, all of these things get logged in here.
Okay.
We keep about 100 before we start kind of rotating them out. If you run things with verbose, you get a lot more data in the logs. But if I just grab one and open it up, this is the log from what I just did. So I can see the version, I get an activity ID that can be correlated across different sessions and different interfaces. The OS, you can see the exact arguments that were passed into the command. The version, you can see in this case, it was not a com call because it's the CLI calling it directly. And then all of the internal stuff. If I do something a bit more complicated like WinGet list, and I do that with verbose, because WinGet list is looking at every single installed package on my system, and it's trying to correlate them with all configured sources. You will see a lot more data in that one. Let me sort them by the date.
There it is. No.
It's much bigger.
Yeah. So if you use WinGet upgrade all, this will every time there will be a log inside of this folder, and then I can check what is the status. So I have a install log kind of experience if I install something with WinGet or do something with WinGet. Okay.
And if the installer supports logging, you can also tell it where to stick the installer log. So in this case, you can see I just said list, use verbose, and open up the log folder for me. You'll see kind of the same sort of stuff at the top here, but then you get into a lot more of the data. You can see some stuff related to certificate pinning, talking to the store. You can see some of the things starting to go in and start looking at matching and identifying which resources are going to be used. You can see the HTTP traffic going to that REST endpoint for the store, the data that we posted, the data they reported back with. Just massive amounts of data for every single thing that is going on under the hood.
Nice.
To get all the way to the end of what's going on, including all of the SQLite queries with the local database.
Nice. Okay, cool. Okay, this is also new for me. I don't know that's cool. That's cool. Good. I think we are 3 minutes away from quitting our meeting. Do we have any other questions? Alan is saying thank you.
You bet.
You're very welcome.